continents in the lately, and so it's great that we actually managed to overlap our calendars to be here. So Teddy is going to tell us a little bit the story about IDEO, what IDEO is doing in Singapore, and he knows that you know about IDEO, but the idea is to get a little bit deeper understanding of this field of design consultancy firms and the role of IDEO within that, and the role of Teddy within this whole context. So I'm not going to say much more, so I'm going to let Teddy use all the 85 minutes that we have left, and let's try to make this interactive, and you have a lot of interest and questions about IDEO, and let's use this opportunity to really try to learn and exchange opinions and questions and answers on this topic. So thank you, Teddy, and let's take it away.
Hello. I'm not a big fan of this kind of venue, so because it makes me up here, makes you out there. But I'm totally, like Manuel said, like discussions, questions, totally open. I'm not normally dressed like this actually. I was at a client today that so I didn't get this not for you, just so you know. Yeah, so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself really quickly, so you can kind of get a sense of like where I'm coming from and how I fit into IDEO, which actually is a little bit different than a lot of people at IDEO. A little bit about IDEO itself. I'll run through some cases and stuff we've been doing here in Singapore. I'll tell you a little bit about design and how we think it's evolving, and then we'll get to what the other group was a bit more interesting was what's IDEO doing here in Singapore. It's a lot of content. We probably won't get through all of it. So if you feel like, hey, this isn't so interesting what you're talking about, like go forward, just let me know, and I'll skip to kind of other stuff. Yeah. So super informal. So I have a pretty broad, quite broad background from doing 3 different companies in Silicon Valley to teaching at various design, engineering, and business schools in the US primarily, but also a little bit here. I ran my own consultancy for a while that was kind of management and design focused. And I'm a huge traveler, so the fact that I've been in 4 continents in the last 3 weeks actually is cool for me. So that's kind of my background, but I'm also a classically trained designer, but also an MBA, which is unusual. We have about 35 MBAs inside of IDEO these days. Again, it's only the last 6 years. So we're kind of starting to see in the market some mixture of design firms going into strategy and strategy firms trying to come into innovation, they call it, right? It's pretty interesting, it's pretty new, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. My MBA is from Colombia, I guess. And yeah, lots of big companies, run 3 or 4 of my own, exited one of those, tanked another one. So pretty interesting, like entrepreneurship, design, ventures background, which is again pretty. It's even for IDEO, where everyone's broad, it's pretty unusual. So obviously we're this design firm. We've got a case. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that means these days, because IDEO has evolved over time from the case you read, which was written 2005, right? That's Peter Kaufman, isn't it, right?
That's right.
Okay, so 2005. That's 8 years ago now, right? And we started in the 90s. So the evolution from kind of real heavy product design, kind of moving into service design, moving into what we call business design in some sense, or organizational design, both. Is a trend across the firm, right? We probably only grab 20% of our revenues these days from product design. So a lot more service design. What is that? That could be retail locations. It could be the interactions you have in a hotel lobby. It could be a bank. It could be the EPSC here, right, in Singapore. We designed that. So we'll talk about that along the way as well. 2, actually thinking about that and then designing organizations. So what's a culture look like and how does it support innovation or the new products and services we're designing in the first place? And then, what about a business model along the way? Great idea, right? So we tend to find that this intersection of kind of design, business engineering is where the firm's moving to overall. Now we still have a legacy of lots of product and engineering, but we're seeing kind of organization and business kind of pulling up as well along the way as the world gets more sophisticated and the problems we encounter more complex. Yeah? So, and also these days we're doing a lot more work in the public sector, especially in Singapore. The office here was founded because the government brought us here, invited us here. So the first 3 years was all government work. And I was hired about a year ago to help level out the office in terms of public and private. So my mandate was to kind of bring us into the private sector here, which we're doing quite successfully, and I'll talk about that along the way. Yeah, we design products and services. Spaces, we don't do space, we're not an architecture firm, right? But we do spaces and services something else. So the full experience here was really important that the space helped the interaction, right? So the great thing about this project, besides the fact that it was a space that everyone could see, and was our big, key win here, and everyone who comes into Singapore sees this thing the first place. That was a great win for us. So we designed not just the space, but the interaction between, the person coming in and the person giving the service. Also the organization behind that. So what was the culture like that was going to support that interaction? And then the IT systems behind the organization. So a super comprehensive, holistic change program that took 3 years, right? IDEO, I think differently from other design firms, is best when it's used across disciplines, right? A lot of places, if you, other design firms don't have the breadth that we do. So you might bring a brief to another company and say, hey, I'd like you to design the interaction, the entertainment system for Singapore Airlines. And another design firm might say, awesome, give us the brief, we'll build that for you. IDEO is probably going to say, well, I'm not sure that actually what you want to design is what you think you want to design, right? And so we probably oftentimes take a step back and have a much deeper look before we go forward. And that oftentimes allows us to have a bigger picture, but also means that we bring in space and interaction and graphic and organization designers. So different kinds of designers, yeah? This is actually a friend of mine, Christian, who no longer is with IDEO, but he's kind of the most famous face at IDEO still because we always use this case. He was actually saw him 2 weeks ago at my house for my 40th birthday party. And Christian, this is a story about a hospital, Memorial Hospital that was, the story goes, the CEO, his sister-in-law fell ill and went to the hospital, his hospital, had a quite horrendous experience over the course of a month as she was recovering, came back, told her sister told her husband, what are you doing? This is crazy, And so he came to us and said, okay, can you tell me what my patient experience is? And we said, sure, right, we can help with that. So Christian went in with a broken leg, right, with a camera underneath his jacket, and actually there's video later, but and basically decided to be the patient. Yeah, I'm gonna halt that story there because I think it's a great finish, but it's also a little bit of a teaser, and I'll come back to it in a second. So we also, as I mentioned, are not just thinking about customer experiences or services, but also about the organizations that will support those kind of things, right? When you're building products, it's one thing to just build a product and hand it over and say, okay, you guys sell it now. Great. But when you're building services, when you're designing services, people have to deliver those services, right? So you can deliver the best thing, but if no one's willing to deliver it or can deliver it with the tone or the kind of ethos that you want, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't translate. So we do a lot of work these days around the organization. Where is this thing that we designed going to land, right, in the organization? That could be a product as well, right? Sometimes it's internal product, and so it has to kind of be pushed into the organization or integrated in the organization. But a lot of times it's services, and in order to design services well, you have to help design the organization. So we'll look at the structure, how is it organized, is it matrix, is it, where's the power, where's the decentralization, the people itself, how do the people process things, and then what's the culture that supports that, yeah? There are other firms that do this exclusively. There's a company called Stone Yamashita, now it's SY Partners in the Bay Area, that does this exclusively. They're remit to do organizational design, organization transformation through design. We do some of that, and we'll do it oftentimes in conjunction with something else. Yeah. This is some of us. So there's 1, 2, 3, 5. There's 8 here. We are now 12. So the region itself is kind of growing, and therefore growing up a little bit. So we now have regional IT, regional marketing, and are looking for regional talent Anybody interesting? Basically, we call it talent, not HR. This person is supposed to be developing our people, not thinking about local regulations and HR policies. So we're looking for a regional talent person. And then there are, as you mentioned, you can see on the left-hand side there's no product design there. We don't actually have product design in Singapore because there's no products to design here. There's not a lot of manufacturing, it's going to be services. We do have capability up in Shanghai, and then obviously in the Bay, if we need it, we bring it over. But our office, therefore, is heavy on kind of the business and organization, as well as interaction and comms. Right? Almost all of our projects have communications. We find it's a huge fail point. You design this great thing, no one can actually tell you what it does, or service, and so it's always common. So that's kind of what we're composed of here, comprised of. Let's see, there are 3 Brits. This guy is Pete. He's a comms designer, design director. He's a Brit, spent time in Shanghai. That guy is David. He actually grew up here, but is a Brit, and grew up in Hong Kong as well, and now has come back, basically. Shan is a researcher, design researcher, basically. Kind of goes out and figures out what needs to be built. She's local, but Western educated. Anka on the top is a German. She's our operations person. Great to have Germans as operations people. Karen is a comm designer with Viennese. In the wedge in the middle there is Kirsch. That's technically my boss. Although there are 4 of us that run the office as directors. She's responsible for the P&L. That's good for me. And then above her is Lishan. So we call them Lishan because she's Lishan and she's Lishan. Also Singaporean, also Western educated. Another design researcher. And then Keith, who is also Singaporean, an interaction designer, also Western educated. Interesting. Why are all the locals Western educated? Very, very difficult to find talent in Singapore that works the way IDEO does. It's completely nonlinear and very heavy in ambiguity. Not such a great fit with Singaporean culture, right? So this also has implications for the business, not just for the talent, right? The sales cycle here is about 2.5 to 3 times as long as it is other places. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about IDEO in Asia, but interesting to note kind of up front that the culture here is very, very significant. So this is a really interesting slide. IDEO is a B2B brand. Most of you probably never heard of it before you got here. It's not Google, it's not Twitter, it's not Facebook, it's not a consumer brand. And at the same time, if anybody who's in business and looking at some kind of design and innovation knows the brand, and it has enormous amounts of impact, especially for 640 people worldwide. I was shocked myself when I got inside. I would always love to kind of play a game, walk into something, and point around at all the things that were IDEO influenced. This is an enormous number of projects, but it's also check out the brands behind it. We work for 44 of the top 50 most innovative companies in the world, 380 of the top 500, Fortune 500. We're usually the top 10 of ourselves among the most innovative companies in the world. It's really an impressive place. And the more I spend time inside of it, like when I first gave my first talk to my former students, they were all like, well, you keep going back and forth between I, we, and they. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not really quite like down with being inside of it yet, right? But the more I spend time inside, the more impressive it gets. And the more I understand why it doesn't grow. And I'll talk about that as well, moving forward. Questions so far? Cool. This is some of the work we've done in Singapore. So administrative manpower, that was the Employment Past Service Center, as well as a couple other things, that whole 3-year transformation process. Administrative health, we're still working. That's about a year and a half of work. MCYS, we just finished a big project. There's a book being produced now. PSD out of the Prime Minister's office, various other popular talent boards, etc. So quite a lot of work here, especially in those first 3 years. We probably switched from 98% public and 2% private at June last year to 80% private and 20% public now. So pretty big shift, and I'll talk about that again, why that shift is as we get into the IDEO. So that's kind of a big broad overview. Questions? Yeah?
You said that that's why IDEO doesn't grow. What do you mean by that?
10 years ago, 12 years ago, IDEO was 350 40 people. Now we're 640 people. That's pretty slow growth, right? And it's because the culture is so strong, and because you're trying to find people who we often call them unicorns, right? You can't really find them because you're looking for design and engineering in one person, or design and business in one person, or engineering and design in one person. And it's difficult to find, not just Singapore, it's very, very difficult to find here, but in general. And it's also the way that it works inside is, I'll tell more stories on this, but it's kind of the way you want a lot of businesses to work, right? Now that also has frustrations, especially for MBAs, right? Where you're like, come on, you know, like, let's move a little bit. But we have no investors, it's a partnership, so there's no quarterly earnings, so we get to tell, and we always have more work than we can possibly do. IDEO does zero marketing. It does brand work, the brand is very strong, but we do zero outbound marketing, right? That's a very powerful position to be in, because we get to tell clients the truth, right? We're not worried about earnings. But that also means we go quite slow. So I'll talk about that again a little bit along the way. So I think that the evolution of IDEO.
Will you talk about roles that MBAs can have in business?
Sure, I will. I will, yes. So as IDEO evolution, right, you can question, well, did IDEO evolve to be from products and services to org and design and business, or and therefore push the market, or was the market moving that way and therefore IDEO responded? Probably a bit of both. I mean, we do a lot of thought leadership work, but you know, all of the work has become far more complex over the years, right? A lot of times it has multiple touch points, which we service out early on in the service design component. Obviously, with the advent of internet, we moved from just physical hardware to physical hardware and some kind of online experience, and then oftentimes that experience also in a retail setting, right? So the touch still becomes more complex. It also often these days is a confluence of hardware and software that makes, again, the overall problems more complex. Hence, you need more different kinds of designers, because now you need interaction designers as well as product designers, as well as org people. So we see that the world itself is kind of shifting, right, from the complexity of the problems, not just this, which IDEO designed, right, the first computer mouse. Great story. Someone took we're always prototyping. We have this phrase that we not only think to build, but build to think. So we're always trying to make things along the way to kind of test them out. So like, well, is this the right size? Let's take it apart. Let's put it back together, a different shape. So the story of this mouse was someone was looking to try and find to build something, to try to prototype it. They grabbed someone's packet of cigarettes. Not a great story, but a packet of cigarettes. Right? And like, okay, that's about the right size. So how do we make it roll? And someone's like, oh wait, hold on 1 second. Ran to the bathroom, got a gym bag, pulled out their deodorant stick, popped off the ball, popped out the deodorant stick. Now I put that underneath the cigarette pocket. Okay, it rolls well. Great. How do we make sure we know it rolls like a lot forever? So they took those two things, they taped it to the armor record player, and they let it roll for 24 hours to see if it was the right density or friction, right? So this kind of stuff happens all the time, and it's quite amazing actually. Some of us who are a bit more cerebral, like myself, right? There's always this like push to make, and even especially these days with kind of DIY culture and maker fairs. And sometimes I feel like well, there's a place for analysis here as well, right? But the culture kind of pushes that. In fact, last weekend, 2 weekends ago, we had a make-a-thon. So we have all these hackathons around the world. This was about making physical products very quickly to make sure that people have these skills that are help get us into reality, not just code. And kind of moving from this kind of Newtonian, really decentralized, really deconstructed place to something that's far more Darwinian and emergent, right? We see a lot of complexity. When you see complexity, you can't really understand the whole system a lot of times, so you're kind of trying to push one place, see what happens in some other place. We're not talking about deconstructed parts here. That work becomes, again, much more complex, and I think it's also part of the reason we started hiring MBAs, because you start looking at the whole picture, which includes the finances and the business model along the way. Yeah? So something that's quite predictable to something that's really quite evolutionary, from top down, which we see a lot of Singapore, to really bottoms up, right? Even IDEO is thinking about, we're only in 11 countries, roughly. We do work in probably 40-ish, but there are places in the world we can't do it because we're too